Hello and welcome to Washington Exec's video series. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with Washington Exec, and with me today is Richard Kitt, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environment and Energy Resilience. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mr. Kitt.
Hey, Amanda, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So I wanted to start by asking if you can give us a bit of insight into the major concerns or threats climate change poses to military readiness.
No, thanks. Thanks for the question. So, the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary and others have articulated very clearly that climate change is a reality today that is adversely affecting the Department of Defense, principally in sort of three areas. The first is operations. So it is creating increased demands upon our forces, either to provide defense support for civil authorities or humanitarian assistance overseas for countries and nations that are affected by extreme weather events. And perhaps nothing is more pronounced or closer to home than firefighting. So the National Guard has traditionally mobilized units to help with firefighting. Due to the climate change driven increase in forest fires, the National Guard, the director of the National Guard Bureau, General Dan Hokanson, said, we no longer have a fire season, we have a fire year. So the first effect is on operations. The second effect is upon our installations. So the installations themselves are affected by adverse and extreme weather conditions, whether it's drought, heat, or flash floods. And this affects readiness in a couple of ways. So Fort Irwin, California had these massive flash floods with no historic precedent and wiped out and washed away the ranges. So we couldn't train. Likewise, drought and heat have increased the risk of forest fires. So we haven't been able to do some of the training on our large installations like Fort Hood or Fort Carson. So a range of effects on our installations. And then finally, in terms of the effects upon our equipment and our service members. So high heat days put soldiers at risk. And if they're doing the things that service members are supposed to do on the flight deck of a carrier or maneuvering out in the desert, if it's 36 degrees Celsius, wet bulb, the human body can no longer cool itself. Now, we're getting more and more days where we're closer and closer to that to that temperature. Same with our equipment. A lot of our equipment was designed for a different era, and now it's finding its physical capabilities being taxed. So to summarize, climate change is real. It's having effect today, and the effect is on operational demands for the force, challenges to infrastructure, equipment, and service members.
Right. Well, thank you for setting the stage for us there. I wanted to also ask if you can give us a brief overview of the DOD's Climate Adaptation Plan. What are some of its key elements and what does it hope to achieve?
Right. Now, so the Defense Climate Adaptation Plan was written in response to Executive Order 14008, but it actually builds on many years' worth of work directed by our oversight committees in Congress. So even during the last couple of years where we didn't say climate change much in the government, our congressional oversight committees were telling us to be prepared. So we had this bipartisan consensus and support for the need for adaptation. So if you take a look at the Defense Climate Adaptation Plan, and it's available, and I would encourage your audience to read through it, it's intended to change the institution of the Department of Defense. All right. It's to ingrain climate considerations across the department. So it's stated its end state is to ensure that the Department of Defense can operate under changing climate conditions, preserving our operational capability, enhancing natural and man-made systems. So it's really about the department preserving its ability to protect the country as we face the challenges of climate change. So that's the intended end state, and that's what we want the Climate Adaptation Plan to contribute to. We have 5 lines of effort, if you will, or components, major components to the plan. And I can talk about these in more detail, but the first and most important one, of course, is climate-informed decision-making. So we have to have data, we have to have educated staff, we have to have models, analysis, and war games that take into account the effects of climate change. If we don't incorporate climate change considerations into our decision making, we will not adapt and we will not be prepared. So that's the first and arguably the most important. The next is to train and equip a climate-ready force. We've got to have a force that can operate in those temperatures that I talked about earlier. So when it's 36 degrees wet bulb Celsius, the Department of Defense is not going to go home and quit. We're going to continue our mission. So how do we do that? Is it tactical cooling? Is it adding air conditioners to our vehicles and aircraft that may not have them now? Is it a change in our medical procedures? We've got to be able to continue to operate under all conditions. The third is resilient natural and man-made infrastructure. This is the traditional understanding of adaptation. So it's a lot of concrete in terms of perhaps seawalls or new roads or other things like that. It's also nature-based systems. So salt marshes and mangrove swamps to protect and enhance the resilience of the coastline. Fourth is we need a supply chain resilience. We need to take a look at the climate exposure of our supply chain. Just as we are concerned about adverse powers or influence in the development and production of critical components, we also have to be concerned about climate hazard to key nodes in our supply chain. So this is, this makes a lot of sense from the department's perspective. We've got to ensure that the supply chain is there. The good news is we build a more resilient supply chain, resilient towards cyber attacks or resilient against climate change effects. It helps America. It brings some of these jobs home. It increases our industrial capacity, or if not for us, for our close allies that are part of the team. And then speaking of teams, sort of the fifth line of effort is we have to enhance our collaboration with other organizations. So that's interagency across the federal government, intra-government with states and local authorities internationally, and then of course with stakeholders, nonprofits, academics, and others.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Are there ways in which you're currently implementing parts of the roadmap today?
Yes, so there's a variety of things that are underway right now, and I could pick a couple of them. So at the climate-informed decision-making, we're training and educating folks on the realities of climate change, and we're building some decision support tools. The most significant is called DCAT, Defense Climate Assessment Tool, which assesses hazards at our installations around the world across 2 time periods, 2 climate scenarios in eight areas of effect. And we then can use that for master planning. So don't put a building here if we know it's going to flood, or if you recognize that you're going to have a cooling load that exceeds your current capacity, you might have to change your energy system. For your audience, one of the things that we're implementing is, if you take a look at supply chain resilience and innovation, we have a procurement activity underway, a couple of different aspects to benchmark and start to track our greenhouse gas emissions in the supply chain. All right. So the Department of Defense is arguably about the 55th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. So if we were a UN nation, there'd be 2/3 of the UN countries that emit less greenhouse gases than the Department of Defense. We think about half of those are embedded in our supply chain. So that's what our contractors and equipment providers and service providers generate in the course of their operations. So we've had a request for information where a number of our major contractors responded about their climate policies and their ability to track greenhouse gases in their supply chain. We've also just published a sources sought and a request for comment on a statement of work, which will lead to the department retaining an outside organization that will help us benchmark and track and grade performance for greenhouse gas emissions across our supply chain. So those are just 2 examples, I think, but they're certainly relevant to your audience.
Definitely wonderful opportunities there as well. So I know you talked about this a bit as the 5th component in the plan. Why is it critical for federal agencies to work together to address immediate climate change impacts and also prepare for the future?
Well, I think that the most striking example is different agencies have different perspectives and different levels of expertise, and they also have different funding. So I come from the Department of Energy. I was there for a couple of years in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And one of the strongest partnerships between the Department of Defense and other federal agencies is with DOE. All right, so we cooperate with DOE in the development of a variety of technologies, whether it's technologies that come out of a DOE lab that we then mature and prototype and bring into the Department of Defense, or whether it's collaboration on new technologies like advanced geothermal. Another significant partnership is with the General Services Administration. So GSA has the rosters of the zero emission vehicles that we're going to start to procure as we transition our fleet, charging infrastructure. GSA also keeps track of the greenhouse gas emissions of the top 100 companies that supply goods and services to the government. So strong partnerships there. Others, of course, for us are with EPA and Department of Transportation, just to name a few.
All right, wonderful. Well, Mr. Kidd, thank you so much for helping us unpack the adaptation plan and understand a bit more about the impacts of climate change to the nation. I really appreciate you being here.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Of course.